The cold January air bit at Sarah's cheeks as she stood in the pre-dawn gloom. The line snaked from the doors of the rural health clinic, a silent testament to a quiet crisis unfolding across the hills of eastern Kentucky. It was 2026, and honestly, the scene felt like a throwback to a much earlier, harder time. People shuffled their feet, their breath pluming in the frigid air, just waiting for the doors to open. They weren't here for a special event or a giveaway. No, they were here for basic healthcare, funded not by a booming local economy, but by a steady stream of dollars from Washington, D.C. A quiet irony hung in the air, thick as the morning fog. Many of the people in this line would vote for politicians who promised to slash the very federal spending that kept this clinic's doors open. This scene, repeated in countless towns across the Commonwealth, holds the central mystery of modern Kentucky. It is a state fiercely proud of its independence, a place where self-reliance is preached from every pulpit and political stump. Yet beneath this veneer of rugged individualism lies a starkly different reality. Kentucky receives more money from the federal government than it pays in taxes, a gap wider than in any other state in the Union. This dependence is not a recent development but a deep-seated condition, woven into the fabric of its economy, its politics, and the daily lives of its people. The question isn't just how this happened, but why it continues, and what it means for the future of a state that prides itself on standing on its own 2 feet. The paradox is everywhere you look. It's in the brand new highway interchanges connecting towns with dwindling populations, built with federal highway funds. It's in the disability checks that arrive like clockwork in mailboxes, providing a floor for families where traditional jobs have vanished. It's in the Medicaid cards that pay for the births of more than half the babies born in the state. For generations, Kentucky has been locked in a complex dance with the federal government, a relationship of both necessity and resentment. To understand Kentucky today, one must unravel this tangled history of need, pride, and the vast sums of money that flow from the nation's capital into the heart of Appalachia. This essay will explore that contradiction. We will journey back to a time when Kentucky's economy was a powerhouse, fueled by coal and tobacco, and trace the long, slow decline that replaced local prosperity with federal assistance. We will meet the people caught in this web, from the laid-off miner retraining for a job that may never come, to the small-town mayor struggling to keep the lights on with federal grants. Through their stories and the stark data that backs them up, we will dissect the causes and consequences of this dependency. Why does a state that champions small government rely so heavily on federal aid? The answer is a story not just about Kentucky, but about the changing nature of America itself. It wasn't always this way. There are still people in the hollers of Pike and Harlan counties who remember a different time, a time when the clang of coal cars was the soundtrack of prosperity, not a ghost of a bygone era. In the mid-20th century, Kentucky was an energy giant. The rich seams of bituminous coal that ran beneath its mountains powered the nation's steel mills, factories, and power plants. A strong union, the United Mine Workers of America, ensured that the men who risked their lives underground earned a decent wage. They had good health benefits, solid pensions, and a sense of dignity that came from doing hard, essential work that fueled the American dream. Towns like Hazard and Pikeville weren't just surviving, they were thriving. Main streets were lined with department stores, movie theaters, and car dealerships. High school football games on Friday nights were the center of the universe, and the community felt a powerful sense of shared identity and purpose. The money flowed from the ground up. Coal companies paid local taxes that funded schools and public services. Miners spent their paychecks at local businesses, creating a circular, self-sustaining economy. Federal aid was something for other places, for disasters or distant, abstract problems. Here, in the mountains, people believed they made their own way, powered by the black rock they dug from the earth. This prosperity was built on more than just coal. Kentucky's fertile bluegrass region was the heart of the nation's tobacco industry. The sweet smell of curing tobacco hung in the air every autumn. For generations, small family farms relied on their tobacco allotment, a government-managed quota system that guaranteed a stable price for their crop. It wasn't a path to great wealth, but it provided a reliable income that supported families in rural communities. The annual trip to the tobacco warehouse to sell the year's harvest was a ritual, a cornerstone of the agricultural economy that, like coal, felt uniquely Kentuckian. In this golden age, which now feels impossibly distant, Kentucky's identity was tied to what it produced. It sent coal and tobacco out into the world and in return, built a robust, localized economy. The relationship with the federal government was transactional in a different way. It was a partner in managing the tobacco market, not the primary source of income for a huge portion of its citizens. The pride in self-sufficiency was earned, a reflection of a tangible reality. But the foundations of this prosperity were more brittle than anyone knew. The forces of global markets, technological change, and public health concerns were gathering, poised to shatter this world forever. The collapse did not happen overnight. It was a slow, grinding process, like the erosion of a mountainside. The first cracks appeared in the coal fields. Mechanization, particularly the rise of massive-scale strip mining, began to change the industry. Huge machines could do the work of hundreds of men, clawing away entire mountaintops to get at the coal seams below. The demand for miners plummeted. At the same time, competition from cheaper coal out of Wyoming's Powder River Basin and the eventual rise of natural gas began to shrink coal's share of the energy market. The union's power waned, and the high-paying jobs that had supported families for generations started to disappear, one by one. For the men who lost their jobs, the options were grim. Many were in their 40s and 50s, with bodies broken by years of hard labor underground. They had specialized skills that were no longer in demand. Some left, joining a long tradition of Appalachian outmigration, seeking work in the factories of Ohio or the auto plants of Michigan. But many stayed. This was their home. Their families had lived in these hills for centuries. They held on, hoping the mines would call them back. But the call never came. The company towns emptied out, the storefronts were boarded up, and a quiet despair began to settle over the region. Simultaneously, the other pillar of Kentucky's economy began to crumble. In the 1990s and early 2000s, a national campaign against smoking gained unstoppable momentum. Public health concerns led to massive lawsuits against tobacco companies and a sharp decline in cigarette consumption. In 2004, the federal government ended the tobacco quota and price support system that had propped up small farms for decades. The Tobacco Master Settlement Agreement provided buyout money for farmers, but it was a one-time payment for a way of life that was ending forever. The stable, predictable income from the golden leaf vanished, leaving a void in the agricultural heartland. The twin collapses of coal and tobacco created a perfect economic storm. These were not just industries, they were the cultural and economic bedrock of the state. Their decline left a gaping hole that nothing has been able to fill. The self-sustaining local economies of the mid-20th century evaporated. With the primary job creators gone, tax revenues dried up, schools struggled, and local governments found themselves unable to provide basic services. Kentucky was left with a workforce trained for jobs that no longer existed and a landscape scarred by industrial extraction. It was into this vacuum that the federal government stepped, not as a temporary partner, but as a permanent lifeline. When we talk about federal dependency, we are talking about a simple, stark imbalance in accounting. It means that a state receives significantly more money from the federal government than its citizens and businesses pay in federal taxes. This money flows into the state through a vast network of channels. It comes in the form of Social Security payments to retirees, disability benefits for those unable to work, and Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements that pay for the health care of the elderly, the poor, and the disabled. It's the funding for food stamps, now called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, that helps families put food on the table. This flow of federal dollars goes far beyond individual benefits. It includes massive infrastructure projects, like the highways and bridges built with money from the Federal Highway Administration. It's the grants that fund local health departments, community development projects, and substance abuse treatment centers. Federal contracts are awarded to companies within the state, and federal salaries are paid to a wide range of government employees, from soldiers stationed at Fort Knox and Fort Campbell to park rangers in the Daniel Boone National Forest. Each of these streams contributes to a river of federal cash that has become essential to the day-to-day functioning of Kentucky's economy. The causes of this dependency are rooted in the economic decline we've already explored. When a state has a large population of older, poorer, and sicker residents, it naturally draws more federal funds for programs designed to support those exact populations. As high-paying jobs in coal and manufacturing disappeared, many Kentuckians were left with few options. The rate of applications for Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, skyrocketed in the coal fields. It became a last resort safety net in a region where the social safety net of a union job had been torn away. This wasn't a sign of moral failing, but of economic desperation. This situation creates a profound disconnect. The money that sustains so many communities feels abstract, arriving from a distant government in Washington. It doesn't feel earned in the same way a paycheck from the local mine or factory did. This fosters a complicated psychology, where people can simultaneously rely on federal assistance for their survival, while politically opposing the very idea of a large, interventionist government. The dependency is an economic reality, but the resentment of that dependency is a powerful political force. This contradiction is central to understanding Kentucky's place in the American political landscape today. The data paints a clear and startling picture of Kentucky's situation. According to analyses from institutions like the Rockefeller Institute of Government and the Pew Charitable Trust, Kentucky consistently ranks at or near the top of all states in its reliance on federal funds. For every dollar Kentuckians send to Washington in the form of taxes, the state gets back well over $2 in federal spending. This ratio is the highest in the nation. To put it another way, the federal government spends more than twice as much in Kentucky as it collects from it. This isn't a small gap, it's a chasm that has been widening for decades. Let's break down where that money goes. A huge portion is directed toward individuals through what are known as transfer payments. In 2024, nearly 20% of all personal income in Kentucky came directly from the federal government in the form of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, disability, benefits, and other assistance programs. This is one of the highest percentages in the country. In many rural counties, especially in the eastern coal fields, that figure is even higher, sometimes approaching 40% of all income. In these places, the federal government is, by far, the largest single source of economic activity, dwarfing any private industry. The reliance on federal dollars extends deep into the state's own budget. A significant percentage of Kentucky's state government revenue comes not from state taxes, but from federal grants. This money is critical for funding education, transportation, and, most significantly, healthcare. The state's Medicaid program, which provides health coverage to over 1.7 million low-income Kentuckians, more than a third of the state's population, is predominantly funded by the federal government. Without this massive infusion of federal cash, the state's healthcare system would collapse, and the state budget would face an insurmountable crisis. This financial reality stands in stark contrast to the state's political rhetoric. Kentucky has consistently elected federal representatives, most notably Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, who have built their careers on promises of fiscal conservatism, reduced government spending, and balanced budgets. Yet, the state they represent is the nation's leading beneficiary of the very federal largesse they publicly decry. This is the Kentucky paradox in its clearest form, a political culture of fierce independence underwritten by an economic reality of profound dependence. The numbers don't have a political opinion, but they tell a powerful story of contradiction. Nowhere is Kentucky's reliance on federal funding more visible or more vital than in its healthcare system. The health statistics for the state are honestly grim. Kentucky consistently ranks among the worst in the nation for rates of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and smoking. In the eastern part of the state, the opioid crisis left a deep and lasting scar, leading to soaring rates of addiction and overdose deaths. This epidemic of poor health is both a cause and a consequence of the region's economic distress. Decades of poverty, lack of access to healthy food, and the physical toll of manual labor have created a population with profound medical needs. The expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act in 2014 was a watershed moment for Kentucky. Hundreds of thousands of low-income adults gained health insurance for the first time. For many, it was a life-changing event. People who had ignored chronic conditions for years could finally see a doctor. They could get medication for high blood pressure, receive treatment for diabetes, and access screenings for cancer. Rural hospitals and clinics, which had been on the brink of financial ruin from treating uninsured patients, found a stable source of revenue. The federal government picked up the vast majority of the cost, injecting billions of dollars into the state's healthcare economy. Consider the story of a man like David, a 58-year-old former coal miner from Letcher County. After the mine laid him off a decade ago, he lost his health insurance. He suffers from black lung disease and severe arthritis in his back. For years, He relied on free clinics and emergency rooms for care, often putting off treatment until the pain was unbearable. When he enrolled in Medicaid, he was finally able to get regular breathing treatments and physical therapy. The federal funding that pays for his care doesn't just manage his pain. It allows him to maintain a basic quality of life in a place with few other resources. His story is one of hundreds of thousands across the state. This reliance, however, creates a state of permanent vulnerability. The future of Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act is a constant subject of political debate in Washington. Any significant cut to federal healthcare funding would be catastrophic for Kentucky. Hospitals would close, clinics would shut their doors, and hundreds of thousands of people like David would lose their access to care. The state government, with its own limited tax base, would be utterly incapable of filling the gap. The health of a huge portion of Kentucky's population is therefore directly tied to political decisions made hundreds of miles away, highlighting the precariousness of a system built on federal dependency. The flow of federal dollars into Kentucky is not an accident of fate. It is, in many ways, the result of a deliberate and highly effective political strategy. For decades, Kentucky's most powerful politician, Mitch McConnell, has mastered the art of leveraging his influence in Washington to direct federal money back to his home state. While his public persona is that of a national conservative leader focused on judicial appointments and fiscal restraint, his career is also a masterclass in the old-school politics of earmarks and appropriations. He has become one of the most powerful figures in American history while representing one of its poorest and most dependent states. This dynamic has been called the McConnell model. It involves voting for and championing a national conservative agenda that often includes tax cuts and reductions in overall government spending, while simultaneously ensuring that a steady stream of federal projects, grants, and contracts flows back to Kentucky. He has secured funding for university research centers, military base expansions, agricultural programs, and critical infrastructure projects. This allows him to campaign at home as a senator who delivers for Kentucky, even as the state's overall economic fortunes continue to languish. It's a strategy that has proven remarkably successful, keeping him in office for nearly 4 decades. This political machine creates a powerful feedback loop. The federal money helps to patch the holes in the state's struggling economy, creating a baseline of stability that prevents a total collapse. This, in turn, lessens the political pressure to enact bold, structural changes at the state level. Why undertake the difficult and politically risky work of tax reform or economic diversification when the federal government can be counted on to pay the bills? The dependency becomes self-perpetuating. The federal funds mask the severity of the underlying economic problems, which allows the political status quo to remain entrenched. The result is a political culture that is deeply cynical. Voters see the disconnect between the small government rhetoric and the reality of their own lives. They may resent the need for a government check, but they also know they can't survive without it. They vote for the politicians who promise to keep the money flowing, even if those same politicians oppose the programs on a national stage. This system has been incredibly effective at maintaining political power for a select few, but it has done little to build a sustainable, independent economy for the future. It treats the symptoms of Kentucky's economic illness while allowing the disease itself to fester. Today, in 2026, Kentucky finds itself at a critical juncture. The model of relying on federal largesse to compensate for a declining private sector economy is showing signs of strain. The national debt is soaring, and the political will in Washington to maintain such high levels of spending is not guaranteed. A future shift in political power could easily lead to austerity measures that would disproportionately harm states like Kentucky. The very lifeline that has kept the state afloat for so long is becoming increasingly frayed and uncertain. The question is no longer if this model is sustainable, but for how much longer it can possibly last. The challenge is immense because the dependency is now generational. Young people growing up in many parts of Kentucky have never known a time when their community wasn't reliant on outside help. They see few opportunities for good-paying jobs at home. The brain drain continues, as the most ambitious and talented young Kentuckians leave for cities like Nashville, Charlotte, or Atlanta, searching for a future they cannot find in their own state. This exodus further hollows out local communities, shrinks the tax base, and deepens the cycle of decline and dependency. The state is exporting its future. There are, however, glimmers of hope. In pockets across the Commonwealth, People are working to build a new kind of economy from the ground up. In places like Pikeville, a former coal town is trying to reinvent itself as a hub for technology and healthcare. In Berea, a long tradition of Appalachian crafts is being married with modern marketing to create a sustainable, artisan economy. Non-profits are working to reclaim former strip mines for agriculture or solar farms. These efforts are small-scale and face enormous headwinds, but they represent a different path forward. One based on local innovation and self-reliance, rather than federal assistance. Ultimately, Kentucky's fate will have implications that extend far beyond its borders. It serves as a cautionary tale for other regions of the country, hollowed out by deindustrialization and globalization. It raises fundamental questions about the role of the federal government in an era of growing inequality, not just between people, but between places. Can a state truly prosper when its economy is so disconnected from its political identity? Can a people maintain their sense of pride and agency when their survival depends on the decisions of a distant government? Kentucky is the proving ground for these questions, and the answers it finds will resonate across America. The story of Kentucky's federal dependency is a story of loss. It is the loss of jobs, the loss of local wealth, and the slow, painful loss of a specific kind of pride that comes from making one's own way in the world. The federal government, with its vast resources, stepped into the void left by the collapse of coal and tobacco. It provided a floor, a safety net that prevented an even more catastrophic social and economic collapse. But that safety net has inadvertently become a ceiling, limiting the state's potential for true, self-sustaining growth. The paradox of a state that votes against big government while being its biggest beneficiary is not hypocrisy. It is a cry of desperation from a place that has lost its economic footing. This journey through Kentucky's past and present reveals a clear chain of cause and effect. The prosperity of the mid-20th century was built on industries that were ultimately unsustainable. Their decline was not met with a bold new economic vision, but with a political strategy that prioritized securing federal aid over fostering local innovation. This created a cycle where economic weakness justified federal spending, and federal spending in turn dampened the urgency for fundamental reform. The result is a state caught in limbo, tethered to a past that is gone and dependent on a federal lifeline that may not last forever. The urgency of this situation cannot be overstated. Relying on the political skill of one powerful senator, or the continuation of federal programs that are constantly under threat, is not a long-term strategy for prosperity. It is a gamble against a future that looks increasingly uncertain. The real work of rebuilding Kentucky must come from within. It requires investing in education, fostering entrepreneurship, and finally confronting the difficult task of creating a 21st century economy in a place still haunted by the ghosts of the 20th. It is a monumental challenge, one that will require a new kind of political courage. Late one evening, in a small town not far from the shuttered mines, an old man sits on his porch looking out at the darkened hills. He spent 40 years underground, and his pension is long gone. His Social Security and black lung benefits pay the bills. He is grateful for the check, but there is a sadness in his eyes. He remembers when the whistle blew for the last shift at the mine. He remembers the silence that followed, a silence that has never really left. "We used to send power out of these hills," he says, his voice raspy. "Now we just wait for the mail to come." That silence, and that waiting, is the sound of the Kentucky crisis.